When my son shouted, "Don't argue with my wife in her house," I felt something inside me tear. Her house. Those two words shattered 35 years of love, sacrifice, and motherhood in a single breath. I didn't answer. I just stared at him, the boy I raised, the man I thought would protect me, and realized he wasn't defending his wife. He was erasing me. Portia Carlton. That was the moment I stopped being his mother and became a stranger standing inside the home I built. Saturday morning. Sunlight spilled through the kitchen windows, warm and bright over the quiet hum of the sea. The scent of freshly baked muffins lingered in the air while I watered the geraniums on the porch, Henry's last gift to me before he was gone. Miles sat in the living room, his paper neatly folded, the sound of each page turning sharp against the stillness. Lena stood nearby, rearranging the flowers I had just placed in the vase. I spoke softly, careful not to sound demanding. "Lena, sweetheart, please don't move that one. Henry always liked the geraniums by the light." She didn't look up. "We're just refreshing the vibe, Portia. You'll love it." My hands tightened around the watering can. "Just, please don't move things without asking." She sighed dramatically and turned toward my son. "See? That's what I meant." Miles lowered the paper, his jaw set. The tone in his voice cut through the room like glass. "Don't argue with my wife in her house." For a second, I didn't breathe. The words hung between us, cold, foreign, final. The only sound left was the sea striking the rocks outside, each wave echoing the break inside me. I wanted to speak, to remind him of every night I stayed awake for him, every inch of this home built from the calluses on my hands and Henry's. But the words refused to come. They lodged in my throat like a stone. He didn't notice my silence. Lena's hand slid over his shoulder, her thumb tracing slow circles, and her eyes met mine with a quiet satisfaction that said everything she didn't need to. And over the hollow of that moment, I heard Henry's voice again, distant and steady, from another lifetime. "If we ever lose this house, we'll lose ourselves." That morning, I understood what he meant. I wasn't the mother of my son anymore. I was a guest in my own home. There was a time when the sea outside my window was gentler, when the air in this house carried only the scent of salt and honey polish, not tension. I can still see Henry's hands, calloused, rough from the steel beams he welded, yet steady enough to hold my face as if it were made of porcelain. We didn't have much back then in Boston. He was a construction engineer. I worked in finance, clawing my way through boardrooms filled with men who talked louder than they listened. Every paycheck, every promotion, every late night was for one dream, a small home by the water, where we could grow old together. But that dream ended when Henry fell from the scaffolding one October afternoon. The world blurred after that. Miles was 18, too young to lose a father, too old to understand how I was breaking inside. I sold my shares, drained the savings, and paid his college tuition. Then I bought this house by the bay, the one Henry and I had circled in a real estate catalog years before, laughing because it seemed too perfect for people like us. I told myself I'd never leave it, that it would keep the memory of him alive. Now, standing in this same house, I see the years stitched into every corner, the wooden walls that creak in winter, the piano Henry played at Christmas, the faint smell of wax on the floors, everything in here. I chose with my own hands. Everything has a story. When Miles called to say he and his wife wanted to move in, just for a while, to save for a place of their own, my heart lifted. After all the years alone, hearing his laughter in these rooms again felt like a second spring. I spent days preparing for them, dusting the shelves, cooking lamb stew, hanging our wedding photo back above the mantel. I thought foolishly that the sound of footsteps upstairs would make the house warmer. For 2 weeks, it did. Then Lena began to redesign. She started with curtains, more natural light, she said. Then the rugs, then the furniture. Soon, half the house smelled of paint and new fabric. It looked outdated, she explained, smiling at me as if she were doing me a favor. One afternoon, as the sea shimmered outside, I heard her voice floating through the porch. She was holding her phone, her face glowing with pride. "Welcome to our coastal home," she said to hundreds of strangers on a live stream. "We've finally made it. Our coastal home." The words hit me like a wave against stone. I froze at the window, watching her laugh and spin the camera around, capturing the kitchen I scrubbed, the flowers Henry planted, the walls I painted when the grief of losing him felt too heavy to carry. My phone buzzed. A message from an old colleague in Boston. "Portia, saw your place on TikTok. Looks amazing." I opened the video. The house looked beautiful, polished, perfect. Except not one photograph of Henry remained, not one trace of me. Every frame screamed of us. But there was no me anywhere in it. Later that evening, I approached her gently. "Lena," I said, "next time, could you please ask before filming the house?" She turned, a half smile on her lips. "It's good for both of us. Portia, you'll get compliments too." I said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. That night, scrolling through her page, I watched strangers comment, "What a beautiful young couple. And your home is goals. My home. My history." Now her content, the house that once held my memories, had turned into her stage, and I, its ghost. That was the night I first felt it, the strange weight of being invisible in the life I built. Friday evening came with the smell of garlic and butter. I made pasta, the kind Miles used to beg for when he was little, always asking for just a bit more cheese. I set the table for 3, lit a candle, and waited for the sound of their steps. They came down together, whispering and laughing. Lena sat across from me, scrolling through her phone, barely touching her plate. "Miles always loved this dish," I said lightly, "since he was 5. She smiled politely. "He doesn't eat carbs anymore. We're on a health plan." The fork in my hand felt heavy. I watched Miles twirl his salad, not looking up. The candle flickered, and for a moment I wondered if it, too, was tired of burning for people who didn't see its light. The next day, Lena announced she was hosting a small lunch for neighbors and friends. "Oh, Portia, you don't have to worry," she said when she saw me in the kitchen. "Just rest. We've got this." So I stood at the doorway, watching as she filled the table with dishes I'd never cooked, sleek plates and white linens. It looked like something out of a catalog, beautiful, soulless. When the guests arrived, they gasped at the decor. "Lena, your home is stunning. You really transformed it." She laughed, a practice sound. "Thank you. We wanted to make our home brighter." My fingers gripped the edge of the counter. I glanced at Miles. He smiled, proud, and said nothing. That silence was louder than any insult. It was consent. When the crowd left, I gathered plates from the table. The laughter still echoed faintly through the hall. I could feel the space between me and my son stretching wider than the ocean outside. As I washed the dishes, their voices carried from the living room. "Lena, we should talk to Mom about putting the house under both our names. It'll make financing easier." "Miles, maybe you're right." The glass in my hand slipped. I caught it before it shattered. My pulse roared in my ears. Both our names. In that moment, I understood something I hadn't dared admit before. I hadn't just lost my place in this family. I was about to lose the very ground beneath my feet. I dried my hands, looked around the quiet kitchen, and listened to the distant waves hammering the shore. They sounded different that night, rougher, restless. Somewhere deep inside, a storm was forming. 3 weeks after that humiliating dinner, my house no longer felt like a home. It had become a studio. Cables ran across the floors, tripods cluttered the hallway, and strangers spoke in sharp, hurried tones about lighting angles and brand identity. Lena had hired a production team to film what she proudly called the modern coastal makeover. The cameraman set up a light stand in the living room, right where my wedding photo once hung. The bright glare hit the wall where Henry's smile used to be. "Lena," I said quietly, trying to steady my voice, "could you move the lights away from the piano?" She didn't turn. "Oh, that old thing? We'll cover it with fabric for a cleaner shot." My hands trembled. That old thing. It was the piano Henry used to play every Christmas Eve, his calloused fingers pressing those keys until the whole room shimmered with warmth. I stepped closer, lowering my tone. "It's not a prop. It's a memory." Lena laughed, soft but sharp. "Well, memories don't fit the brand." The sentence sliced clean through me. I let go of the fabric she handed me, and it fell over the piano, covering it completely. When the crew packed up and left, the silence in the house felt deafening. Miles wandered in, looking tired but distant, as if the room belonged to someone else. "Mom, don't be dramatic," he said. "She's just trying to make the place look nice." "For whom?" I asked. "For everyone. You should be grateful she cares." Grateful. The words stung worse than anything he could have shouted. I turned toward the window, needing air. Outside, the hydrangeas swayed gently in the wind. Henry's flowers, still alive, still untouched. For now. That afternoon, I was upstairs when I heard a crash from below, a hollow, violent sound that made my heart jolt. I rushed down the stairs. The piano had toppled forward, one leg cracked, its lid splintered. A bottle of Lena's perfume had shattered on top, dripping down the keys in oily streaks. I pressed one key. The note came out distorted, a broken cry. Lena appeared in the doorway, phone in hand, not even startled. "Accidents happen, Portia." I turned, meeting her eyes for the first time with unmasked fury. "No, Lena. Disrespect happens." She said nothing. She didn't have to. The faint smile on her face told me everything. That night. Miles came home late. I set the table, the food still warm. "Dinner's ready," I said softly. He avoided my gaze. "We already ate," Lena added. "We stopped by the bistro. Didn't want to bother you." The two of them walked upstairs, chatting about some upcoming collaboration. The untouched plates in front of me steamed quietly until they went cold. When the house finally stilled, I sat alone at the table. The broken piano stood in the corner, the faint scent of perfume still clinging to the air, sweet and suffocating. Henry's voice echoed in my head. "If you ever feel unseen, Portia, make them see you." I whispered back, "I will." By the weekend, the house was once again filled with strangers. Lena had invited her college friends over, young, well-dressed people who talked in quick, shiny words about sponsorships, brand deals, and building engagement. I helped set the table, thinking I'd be joining them. Just before the guests arrived, Lena turned to me with a soft, condescending smile. "Oh, Portia, we thought you'd prefer to rest. The dinner is kind of business." I nodded, pretending not to feel the sting. "Of course." Still, I stayed nearby. Our neighbors, the Blanchards, were there too, so leaving completely felt wrong. I sat quietly at the far end of the table, a background presence in my own dining room. Laughter bounced off the walls. The clinking of glasses and the hum of admiration filled the air. "It's so cool you live here," one of Lena's friends said to her. "Not everyone your age can handle coastal property taxes." Everyone laughed, including my son. Lena leaned forward, smiling proudly. "Oh, we make it work. It's our house now." I felt the fork slip from my hand. The metallic sound against the plate cut through the laughter, but no one looked my way. Miles didn't correct her. He didn't even blink. The words I wanted to say pressed against my chest, but I swallowed them down, tasting salt instead. After dinner, I stayed behind to clean up while Lena lingered in the living room with her friends. I heard her say, voice light and sweet, "Older people sometimes have a hard time letting go. I understand." The sentence was almost kind, but it gutted me. In the kitchen, the hot water reddened my hands. I watched my reflection in the window, a tired woman with eyes that once held authority, now reduced to silence in her own home. The sound of laughter from the other room felt miles away. Later that night, when the guests were gone, I heard voices downstairs. I stopped halfway down the staircase, hidden in the shadows. Lena's voice, "Maybe it's time we ask her to sign it." Miles, "She'll say yes. She always does." My heart slammed in my chest. I looked over the railing. They sat close together, the blue light of the laptop illuminating their faces. On the screen, I saw it. A mortgage document, open and waiting. Lena's hand rested on my son's shoulder. "Once it's under both our names," she whispered, "we can refinance, expand the brand. This house will finally have purpose." Purpose. I turned away before they could see me. There were no tears, only a cold, steady calm. My house had purpose long before you arrived, I thought. The next morning, I woke early and cooked breakfast out of habit. The smell of bacon and coffee filled the air. Miles came down first. "Mom, don't cook," he said. "Lena wants to try her new recipe." I smiled faintly. "That's fine," I said, sliding the pan off the heat. "But breakfast isn't the only thing that's changing here." He didn't understand the meaning behind my words. Not yet. But the sea outside was no longer calm. It roared with the promise of a coming storm. The sound came first, a steady whine, sharp and mechanical, cutting through the quiet morning air. I looked out the kitchen window and froze. A man with a power saw was standing in my garden, slicing through the roots of Henry's hydrangeas. The flowers, blue and violet, blooming for the first time that summer, were being torn out by their stems, thrown into a pile like garbage. I ran outside, my slippers sinking into the dirt. "Lena," I called, trying to keep my voice calm. "What are you doing to my garden?" She didn't even glance up. "We're opening the space for a patio. It'll be better for photo shoots." "For your business, you mean?" She shrugged, eyes on her phone. "It's all the same. Portia. A house should have new energy." I stared at her, the wind whipping the smell of crushed flowers toward me. "That garden was Henry's," I whispered. "You had no right." Lena straightened, brushing soil from her hands. "It's just plants. Let go of the past." I looked down at the ruined patch of earth, roots exposed, petals trampled. It wasn't just a garden. It was everything I had left of him, everything that still bloomed when the rest of life didn't. Then Miles came outside, brow furrowed. "What's going on?" "Your wife," I said slowly, "is destroying this home." He frowned. "Don't start, Mom." But I didn't stop. "She's tearing out the garden your father planted with his own hands." His jaw tightened, and then it happened. Again. His voice rose, sharp and final. "Don't argue with my wife in her house." The world tilted. Even the sea seemed to go silent for a moment. I stared at him, the boy I had raised, the one who once cried when he accidentally stepped on a flower in that same garden. "Her house?" I asked quietly. "Then where do I live?" "Miles." He hesitated, guilt flickering across his face. But Lena spoke first. "You can stay in the guest room if you want privacy." The words stung like a slap. I turned and walked back into the house, not a sound leaving my lips. Inside, half the family photos on the wall had already been replaced, my history swapped out for white space and curated minimalism. By afternoon, the house was quiet again. I brewed a cup of tea and sat by the window. The sea outside shimmered cold and silver. In the reflection of the teacup, my face looked small, older, but steady. I whispered to myself, "You want a new house, Lena? Then you'll see what new really means." When night fell, they left for dinner in town. I opened my laptop and pulled up the property records. My name was still the only one on the deed. No signatures added, no transfers filed. A small smile curved on my lips. Not joy, not spite, but clarity. I picked up the phone. "Hi," I said, my voice calm, almost gentle. "Yes, I'd like to change all the locks on a coastal property tomorrow morning." The moment I hung up, the sea roared against the rocks. It didn't sound angry, just awake. The next morning arrived gray and cool, a soft mist clinging to the porch railings. A small white van pulled up by the gate. Camden Locksmiths. The locksmith was an older man, his shoulders slightly bent, but his eyes clear and kind. I offered him a cup of coffee as he unpacked his tools. When I explained the situation, he didn't ask questions, just listened, nodded, and said quietly, "You're doing the right thing, ma'am. A home needs boundaries." He began to work. The clatter of metal against wood echoed through the hall, sharp and steady. The old locks hit the floor one by one. Then came the new ones, polished, unyielding, firm. When he turned the final key, the click sounded like a heartbeat finding its rhythm again. After he left, I gathered their belongings neatly, carefully, and placed the boxes in the garage. Nothing was broken, nothing thrown away, only moved out of my space. On the dining table, I laid down a single sheet of paper and wrote, "Only those who respect this house may enter." Beside it, I set the old house keys in a framed photo of Henry smiling in the garden. That evening, I sat in my chair by the window, the same one where Henry used to read, and waited. Close to midnight, headlights swept across the driveway, car doors slammed. Footsteps pounded up the porch stairs. "Mom?" Miles called, rattling the doorknob. "The key doesn't work." I didn't move. The lamp beside me cast a soft gold glow over the room. He tried again, louder. "Mom, please, open the door." I spoke through the wood, my voice calm and steady. "This house welcomes love, not arrogance." There was silence. Then Lena's voice, sharp, furious. "You're insane. You can't lock us out." I looked toward the photo of Henry and whispered, "I just did." Rain began to fall, tapping softly against the roof. Outside, I could hear them arguing, her voice rising, his breaking. I switched off the light. The house settled into darkness, peaceful and still. "Let the storm clean what's left," I murmured. For the first time in months, I slept soundly. When morning came, the sun broke through the fog. A knock sounded at the door, Mrs. Blanchard from next door, holding her morning paper. "Portia," she said gently, "I heard voices outside your porch last night." I smiled, serene. "Oh, that was just the house." I said, "It's learning to breathe again." 3 days after the night I changed the locks. The air over Camden turned heavy and damp. The sea outside was gray, restless. I was halfway through my morning tea when a sharp knock broke the quiet. At the door stood a young woman with perfectly curled blonde hair and a gray suit too polished for this town. She walked in before I even offered, setting her briefcase on the table as though the house were hers. "Mrs. Carlton, I'm here to talk on behalf of my sister." I recognized her immediately. Sabrina, Lena's younger sister. She smiled without warmth. "You locked my sister and her husband out. That's illegal, you know." I gestured to the chair across from me. "You're a lawyer, I presume." "Corporate law," she said crisply, sitting down. "But the law is the law." I placed my teacup down, letting the sound of porcelain against wood cut through her arrogance. "And respect," I said, "is respect." She opened a folder, scanning a few papers. "This property could be considered marital if they've contributed to its improvement." "Improvement?" I asked quietly. "You mean by tearing down my husband's garden and breaking his piano?" She blinked but didn't answer, choosing instead to smirk. "Maybe you're just jealous. My sister is young, independent, successful. You had your time." I leaned back, meeting her gaze steadily. "Jealousy fades," I said. "Dignity doesn't." Her expression faltered, just slightly, the first crack in her composure. I reached for an envelope from the drawer and slid it across the table. "Here," I said. "You can read the law. I lived it." Inside was the original property deed, my name, mine alone, her face drained of color. "Tell your sister." I continued softly. "She's welcome to come back once she learns what respect costs." She stood, gathering her files with shaking hands. "You'll regret this," she muttered. "I already did," I said. "That's why I stopped." The door closed behind her with a hollow click. The wind rushed through the open window, carrying the scent of salt and something clean. Outside, the gray sky began to thin, a faint stripe of light pushing through the clouds. I looked toward the sea and whispered, "You can't scare a woman who's already lost everything." It was a quiet June afternoon, the kind of stillness that comes only after too many storms. The sea outside lay calm, silver and endless. I was in the kitchen when I heard the sound of tires crunching on the gravel drive. When I opened the door, Lena stood there, no makeup, her hair pulled back. A worn denim jacket clung to her shoulders. In her hands was a small bouquet of wildflowers, clumsy, uneven, but honest. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. "Only if you remember what's written on the note," I said. Her eyes lowered. "Respect." I stepped aside. "Then come in." The house was silent except for the ticking of the clock on the mantel, each sound echoing like a heartbeat. She stood in the middle of the living room, the same space she once filled with bright lights and cameras, and now, for the first time, she seemed small inside it. "I was terrified you'd never accept me," she began, her voice trembling. "I wanted control because I didn't want to feel small. So," I said evenly, "you destroyed everything that wasn't yours." Her tears slipped quietly down her face. "I thought if I made it mine, I'd belong." I said nothing, letting her words settle into the air. The clock ticked on. "I saw your photo with Henry in the storage room," she continued, voice cracking. "I didn't know he built this house himself. I'm sorry. I thought it was just another pretty house." For a moment, the walls seemed to breathe again. The air grew lighter, softer. I saw her not as the woman who had replaced my memories, but as a girl who'd never been taught how to keep her own. "You wanted ownership," I said finally. "But love isn't ownership. It's trust." She wiped her eyes. "Can we start over?" I met her gaze. "This house forgives once. Never twice. Her shoulders shook as she knelt down and placed the bouquet of wildflowers on the table. The petals trembled in the draft from the open window. Henry used to say wildflowers survive storms because they bend, not break, I said quietly. Lena looked up at me, understanding dawning in her eyes. Then I'll bend, Mrs. Carlton. Then maybe, I answered softly, you'll grow here, after all. She stood, breathing unsteadily, and turned toward the door. Before leaving, she hesitated. Miles doesn't know I came, she said. He's broken. I nodded. So was this house. But we rebuilt it. The wind moved gently through the porch, carrying the scent of salt and new beginnings. Outside, the garden shimmered in the afternoon sun, the hydrangeas blooming again, blue as the day Henry planted them. 3 months passed. Summer arrived quietly over Camden, draping gold light across the bay. The hydrangeas were in full bloom again, blue and heavy with life, their scent floating through the open windows. The house, once tense with silence, now seemed to exhale softly with every breeze. I was watering the porch plants when I heard footsteps on the gravel. Turning, I saw Miles standing at the gate. His hair was longer, his beard unshaven, his posture tired, but his eyes, for the first time in years, were gentle. He stopped at the steps, his voice barely more than a whisper. Can I come in? I opened the door. No words, no hesitation, just space for him to step through. The air between us was thick with everything that had been broken and all that still remained. Then he moved forward and hugged me, sudden and desperate. His shoulders shook as he cried against my shoulder. I'm sorry, Mom. I lost everything. I brushed his hair back, my voice quiet but firm. No, son. You just lost what wasn't yours. He looked at me, startled, but there was no anger in his face this time, only understanding. The words that once wounded him now landed like truth. Lena appeared behind him, hesitant. Her eyes were downcast, her hands clasped around a small tin of cookies. She looked nothing like the polished woman who once ruled this house. When our eyes met, she gave a small, nervous smile. I nodded toward the kitchen. The table was already set, 3 plates, grilled fish, and a loaf of bread still warm from the oven. We ate in near silence. The only sounds were the quiet clinking of silverware and the rhythm of the waves outside, rising and falling against the shore. Halfway through the meal, Lena looked around the room, her voice barely audible. Your house feels different now. I smiled faintly. It's not the house that changed, I said. It's the people inside it. She nodded slowly, and I saw the truth of it reach her. Miles took her hand beneath the table. The simple gesture felt like a prayer. Outside. The sun dipped lower, brushing the sea with streaks of orange and rose. The wind moved gently through the curtains, carrying the scent of salt and blooming flowers through the room. I sat back, letting the sound of the waves fill the spaces words could never reach. Through the open window, the garden swayed as if breathing with the house itself, alive again, forgiving, whole. Homes breathe only when pride leaves, I thought. And as the light of evening settled over the porch, the house stood golden in the quiet, steady, forgiving, and at peace. It had weathered the storm and found its rhythm again, just like the people inside it.